Boise Art Revel is bringing a fresh and exciting live design competition to the Hap Hap Lounge in downtown Boise on December 8th. You're invited to watch as local graphic designers engage in an electrifying showdown that will definitely leave a lasting impact on the creative community. Boise Art Revel is sure to be a one-of-a-kind occasion, and tickets are just $10 if you snag them early on Eventbrite. Search Boise Art Revel or click the link in our show notes to join in on this unforgettable creative experience. Boise, we all love our foothills views, but nothing beats a weekend on the Oregon coast. This is your invitation to discover one of Oregon's most iconic lodges, Salishan Coastal Lodge by SCP Hotels. Set on 200 acres of lush coastal forest, Salishan is more than a place to stay. It's a destination where adventure, relaxation, and wellness come together. For a limited time, CityCast listeners can enjoy 20% savings on stays with code CityCast. Make Salishan Coastal Lodge your next adventure destination. Visit salishan.com and use code CityCast to save 20% on your stay today. Today on CityCast Boise, a new development could bring desperately needed housing units to the area, but this growth comes with costs. A $2 million yearly price tag for the city, congested roads, and additional strain on schools and fire services. We're examining the trade-offs and asking what smart, sustainable growth looks like for Boise. It's Tuesday, December 3rd. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Joining me today is Idaho Statesman journalist Nick Rosenberger. Thanks for being on the show again, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Housing is an evergreen issue in Boise, and to address that issue, a massive new development on Murillo Farms in southwest Boise was recently approved by Boise City Council. And it would include 3,500 new homes and apartments, and 3% of the units are supposed to be affordable housing. So initially, it seems like that's just what Boise desperately needs. But when you dig into the details, there are some major issues with this proposed development. Nick, what are the biggest issues that you've seen that have surfaced?
Yeah. So the project is kind of the type of thing that Boise's looking for, especially with its new zoning code. You know, we need houses. This is a lot of houses in southwest Boise. So it was really, really attractive for city council and for other folks. The main issue with it, though, is that the city's finance staff said several times that, you know, it could cost the city upwards of $20 million over the next 20 or 30 years. And, you know, there's other issues as well with transportation, and, you know, we don't have a fire station close enough to it. So there's some public safety risks there. Everyone's kind of using the same roads to get into Boise to get groceries. And so ACHD is also saying that the roads are going to be congested more than they would like. So there's several issues with the project, and kind of the city leaders recognized those issues and still wanted the project. I believe one of the city council members said that we could make the project work if we wanted to. And so they approved it recently. After years of back and forth, they approved the 3,500 homes, or the annexation, to build those 3,500 homes. And it is needed, but there are definitely issues with the plan.
Yeah. And you mentioned, like there's going to be issues with not having fire services and having it be a strain on fire services, impacts on local schools. And you, in your article, you mentioned $2 million yearly cost for the city in operating expenses and operating losses. Are we so singularly focused on addressing the housing crisis that now we're creating new issues for residents in that area?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, Murillo Farms has been on the docket for a long time. They've been talking about this project and how much it's needed. And I guess it is what city council members are doing is they're weighing the pros and cons. You know, if we don't approve this, then they could just go to Ada County and get approved that way anyways, because it's not currently annexed into the city of Boise. So they could go through Ada County instead, and then the city would be missing out on all the revenue, all the tax money that would come from having it within city boundaries. So in that way, they would have all of the impacts, but none of the benefits. So that was one of the running arguments. And yes, there's issues with the project, and I think everyone recognized that. I don't think there was a city council member that didn't recognize that there was issues with the plan. A lot of them tried their best, I think, to kind of minimize those issues. So when it did get approved, it got approved with a long list of conditions. So some of those conditions, including, having the developers pay an extra $2 million toward ACHD's Orchard Street realignment project. There was an extra $4.5 million that the city would collect in impact fees from the developers. And then they would reserve, for instance, like a 7-acre site for a school. So they are trying to work within, they're trying to get this project going while also minimizing the impacts with some of these conditions.
Nick, one thing that ACHD said, quoting from your article about this, is that if the project is approved with the current land uses, there will be significant traffic congestion that will not be mitigated. How might this traffic congestion in Southwest Boise affect the rest of the city, including major commuting routes?
So yeah, it's a big development. If they really do build all 3,500 houses, that's a lot of people driving back and forth along a couple of corridors like Cole Road, which are already quite busy. And if everyone's driving into Meridian or into downtown Boise, then there's only a few routes that they have to get there.
Yeah.
And that could really slow down and congest the other roads, especially as people try and find, I guess, alternative routes to get where they're going. So that is an issue, and I think that's something that will be interesting to watch over the years as it plays out.
And I think another question I know that I always have is, when there's going to be additional costs or operating cost loss, especially to the tune of $2 million, is that potentially going to lead to higher taxes or service fees for Boise residents to make up the difference?
It could, yeah. One of the really interesting points is that the Idaho legislature cut 10% off property taxes. It was like a year or two ago. And, everyone was kind of celebrating that and, super pumped that they're paying 10% less in property taxes. But it does also affect things like this. If Boise was able to collect more property taxes for a project like this, then possibly it would, someone in the north end or someone on the bench would maybe feel the impact of this development a little bit less. But as is, I would imagine that, yeah, people would probably feel a little bit more of a pinch because of this.
So it feels like maybe the Idaho legislature gets to celebrate that they lowered property taxes, and then Boise is put in a position where they have to raise fees or taxes to make up the difference. And so they come off looking like they're raising taxes and the Idaho legislature gets to play the good guys.
Right. Yeah, it's a really, I guess, complicated thing. Nobody likes property taxes, but they do serve a role, and it's a interesting balancing act to kind of find that middle ground.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. For me, the best part of December is getting to curl up on the couch, snuggled under a warm blanket, sipping something delicious and soaking up the holiday glow. But as cozy and magical as this time of year can be, it's also when extra stress can creep in with family gatherings, busy schedules, or even just the pressure to feel festive throughout the season. Sometimes we need a little extra help to feel that holiday peace in our everyday lives. That's why I think therapy is so valuable. Therapy has helped me learn how to process my emotions, build resilience, and find the tools to feel more grounded and joyful throughout the year. If you're thinking about giving it a try, BetterHelp makes it so simple. It's entirely online, so it's designed to fit into your busy schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, plus switching therapists is free if you need a better fit. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/citycast to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/citycast. Nick, I'm really curious, how might the financial strain of this development impact future investments in community infrastructure or projects for Boise?
City councilors mentioned this in their meeting. Jimmy Halliburton was one of the main opponents for approving this annexation. And he was saying that, If we have $20 million less, then what are we giving up?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. We don't know what the issues are going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. And if you're taking $20 million away and putting that into this specific subdivision, that means, you have 20 million less to address other issues in the city. And so it is kind of you're trying to see into the future a bit, and hopefully, there's not any massive problems, emergency kind of scenarios where, you're 20 million out and you need that money for something. It is kind of a gamble and a lot of the city councilors mentioned that. They said it is a gamble, but they thought that it was worth it. So.
And on the flip side, looking at this maybe from a little bit different perspective now, with 3,500 houses and apartments going into this development, how will that impact housing affordability, especially maybe for middle and low income residents?
Yeah, it would be a huge, I guess, bump to the city's housing stock. In 2021, the city commissioned a study that found that the city would need to build 2,700 new homes per year and nearly 28,000 homes by 2030. That's how far behind we are in our housing stock. So being able to provide these homes would kind of help fill out that missing middle, is what they call it. And hopefully, as more housing stock hits the market, that would help lower prices a little bit and make housing a little bit more affordable as we kind of address the shortage.
And part of the agreement that City Council made was that 3% of the housing needed to be low-income housing or more affordable housing. How is that going to play out, or what does that look like in terms of what kind of housing will be available and who can afford it?
Yeah, so there's different classifications of housing affordability. You can get really into the weeds with this stuff. There's low income housing, there's workforce housing, there's all these different words for basically rent restricted housing. In Boise, 3/4 of the need for homes are for those earning about 80% of the area median income. So what that means is about 54,900 for a one-person household, going up to 78,400 for a four-person household. So what a lot of these homes would be doing is they would be kind of filling that need. They would be rent restricted or what have you, so that they could be affordable for those income levels. So people would only be paying about 30% of their income for housing, which is the kind of the baseline limit before you start becoming housing insecure, where you're paying too much of your income into housing.
And again, to pivot just a little bit, because there's just so much going on with housing, so many potential issues that are coming as we grow and expand. And the Murillo development isn't the only instance of Boise okaying this desperately needed housing, and where the booming growth then leads to potentially very serious effects or impacts. The Sunny Ridge, Painted Ridge, and Bonneville Point subdivisions in East Boise were also built to address our housing crisis and the demand for housing, but they all depend on Columbia Road as their only entrance and exit point. And this past fall, there were several fires burning in that area that, with a little more wind, could have left those residents trapped. What areas in and around Boise are most at risk for some of these issues? And Nick, do you think we can safely grow and expand in those places?
So there's a lot of different factors that go into where you build homes, and one of those things is risk. So, how much, and this is something that insurance industry looks at a lot. So, is there wildfire risk? Is there flooding risk? Is there landslide risk? More out east, there's more hurricanes and tornadoes that also play in those calculations. In Boise, the big one is wildfire. And so I believe homes within Boise have a higher risk of catching on fire than about 98% of communities in the United States, which is significantly higher. That's a big issue.
That's not a stat. I don't like that stat. That's not that's not a good statistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do see homes getting built in areas that have a higher risk of fire. And those three subdivisions that you mentioned, they are in an area that is very high risk. The U.S. Department of Agriculture put out this wildfire risk communities map. And if you look at that map, basically south of the Boise airport is about as high risk as you can go. And that goes from about Cole Road or so all the way to the Boise River. And these communities or these subdivisions are right in the middle of that. They only have one road out. So if it becomes blocked, then that is going to be a pretty serious issue.
Yeah.
You mentioned, is there a way to address these housing issues while also building safely? I think yes. It is, as I mentioned before, with a lot of these things, it's a balancing act. You need to build homes, and you need to build them quick before the growing pains catch up, and before people are facing homelessness and all the associated issues with that. But you also can't be building in an area that is going to catch on fire 2 years from now. And we have seen this in the past. So for instance, the Terra Nativa subdivision a few years ago in the Boise foothills, there was landslides out there. Those homes were condemned, and that's an issue. Like, you have to look at the environment you're in. If you're in the foothills, there's probably a greater risk for fire or landslides. If you're in the Boise River floodplain, there's probably a risk for floods. So it's just like paying attention to these different areas and the different risks, I think is really important, especially as we consider the risks that we have from not building enough homes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of complicating factors going on here. It's not clear cut what the right answer is, or what the right answer looking back in 10 years, whether we'll say that good thing we built all those houses, or whether we'll say, wow, that put a huge strain on the city. That was a huge mistake. And so I also don't envy them these decisions. I think people are worried about how do we address housing, but also not put a strain on the current city services and infrastructure that current citizens of Boise rely on.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's tricky for sure.
Nick, is there anything else that really stood out to you while looking into the Murillo development and this different growth and development around Boise that residents and people in the Treasure Valley should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that kind of stood out to me when I was talking with one resident at those subdivisions in southeast Boise near the Micron development, one of the residents told me that she wasn't aware of the fire risks when she bought her home. I think that's something that everyone should pay attention to if you're considering buying a house or moving out somewhere. You might just take a look at the fire risk map, or you might look at flood hazards or the chance for landslides. I think city staff and all of them do their best to make sure that homes are built in safe areas, but that doesn't mean that there isn't missed areas. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for people to just do a bit of research themselves. Look at where that potential house is. Look at the risks there, and then weigh that with your own kind of image of what you want and what might be coming in the future. We all have different visions for what the future holds. And, if you're going to live in a place for 5 years and then move out, then maybe that's not a big problem for you. If you're going to live there for 20 or 30 years and raise your grandkids there, then maybe you might consider looking at fire maps a little bit more.
No, I think that is a great point. That I think there's kind of this feeling when you live in this area, move to this area, we're like, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have tornadoes, we don't have natural disasters. It's Boise. But there are major issues, especially wildfires, that do affect our area. And I think this last fall, it became very apparent how close those could get to the developments we've built and how much of an issue that could present for our city. And so, yeah, especially if you're looking at buying a home or you're looking at moving to this area, knowing the risk that you might have of your house catching on fire, that's a really big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Nick, thank you so much. I know that this is a very nuanced discussion, something that people are always talking about and wondering about in this area. So thank you so much for joining me and breaking it down.
Yeah, happy to go on. Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, we would love it if you'd leave us a review. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a look at Boise's best old school restaurants. You won't want to miss it.